Chapter 1. The Whisper Beneath the Boards. The letter arrived on a damp Tuesday morning, its envelope thick and cream-coloured, sealed with a peculiar wax stamp shaped like a coiled serpent. Hercule Poirot turned it over with the delicate precision of a jeweller handling a rare gem. Hastings, seated opposite him in the breakfast-room of their London flat, lowered his newspaper and peered at the curious emblem. "Another admirer, Poirot?" he asked, though he knew better. Poirot gave a modest shrug and used a letter-opener to slice through the wax. He read silently for a moment, brow furrowing slightly, then handed the letter to Hastings. "My dear Poirot," the letter read, "I beg you to come to Charnwood House in Sussex. Strange things are afoot. Last night I heard footsteps behind the walls. Then a voice whispered my name. The servants are terrified, and I fear I am losing my mind. You are the only one who can uncover the truth. Yours, in desperation, Lady Amelia Trentham." Hastings whistled softly. "Sounds like something out of a penny dreadful." "Mais non, mon ami," Poirot replied, already rising to fetch his travel case. "Lady Amelia is not a woman prone to flights of fancy. I met her once, many years ago, sharp as a tack. If she claims to hear voices behind walls, then we must consider it seriously." An hour later, they were aboard the train to Sussex, the countryside blurring past their window, Hastings, ever the romantic imagined crumbling staircases and haunted portraits, while Poirot sat motionless, fingertips pressed together, eyes closed in contemplation. Charnwood House stood at the edge of a wooded vale, surrounded by overgrown hedges and blanketed in mist. The butler who greeted them, a thin man with hollow cheeks named Sikes, spoke in hushed tones as he led them through the dim halls. Paintings of grim-faced ancestors lined the walls, and somewhere in the distance a clock struck the hour, though neither man could locate it. Lady Amelia awaited them in the drawing-room, her once fiery red hair now a muted silver, though her eyes remained sharp. She greeted Poirot warmly and nodded to Hastings. "You've come quickly." "Thank you," she said, pressing a handkerchief to her lips. "You must think me mad, but it happened again last night, on the staircase. I heard it, a voice calling from beneath the steps." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "You say beneath the steps?" She nodded. "Yes, hollow-sounding, like someone trapped in the wood. And then—" She hesitated. "Then the old grandfather clock began to chime, though it has not worked in years." Poirot made no immediate reply. Instead, he requested to see the staircase. They were led down a corridor that twisted like a maze, until at last they came upon it, an old curving staircase of dark oak, its surface worn smooth by decades of use. Poirot knelt, tapping each step with a knuckle. The sound changed midway. Hollow, as Lady Amelia had said. "It is as I suspected," he murmured. "Someone has altered these stairs." Hastings looked around nervously. "You don't think someone's hiding in there, do you?" Poirot stood slowly, his eyes gleaming. "Not hiding, Hastings, perhaps imprisoned or worse, intended to be discovered." A gust of wind howled through the corridor, and the faintest creak echoed from the staircase. Lady Amelia gripped the banister, her knuckles white. "There is a secret in this house," Poirot said softly, "and I fear it is one long buried and very much alive." Chapter 2. The Ghost in the Mirror. The following morning broke damp and grey, a thin fog curling around the edges of Charnwood House like a veil drawn over a corpse. Poirot rose early, as was his custom, impeccably dressed and impeccably focused. Hastings, meanwhile, was still rubbing the sleep from his eyes when he found his friend already sipping chocolate in the breakfast room, a leather-bound notebook open beside him. "I trust you slept well?" Poirot asked without looking up. "Well as one can when a staircase may be whispering and old clocks chime in their graves," Hastings muttered, reaching for a teapot. Poirot gave a small nod, closing his notebook. "I took a brief promenade around the house before sunrise. The mists are quite theatrical this morning, most conducive to dark imaginings. You think Lady Amelia's hearing things, then?" "I think Lady Amelia hears exactly what she says she does. It is not the truth, I doubt, but the reason behind it." Before Hastings could respond, Sikes appeared silently in the doorway, as if materialized from the shadows themselves. "Lady Amelia requests your presence in the east parlour, monsieur." They followed the butler down a narrow passageway, lined with faded tapestries. The east parlour was brighter than the rest of the house, its tall windows admitting pale light that gave the room a cold, sterile feeling. Lady Amelia stood at the hearth, holding something in her gloved hand. "It happened again," she said as they entered, "early this morning, but this time I found something." She extended her hand and revealed a small object wrapped in silk. Poirot took it gently and unwrapped it with care. Inside lay a key, brass, aged but recently polished. Its bow was ornate, shaped like a coiled serpent, identical to the wax seal on the letter she had sent him. "This was on the 5th step," she said. "It must have been pushed up through the wood. I heard the sound and turned to see it lying there." Poirot examined it closely, turning it in the light. "Curious. This is no ordinary key. A cabinet, perhaps, or a strong box." "Have you ever seen it before?" Hastings asked. Lady Amelia shook her head. "Never." Poirot tapped a finger against his lip. "Then we must search for the lock it belongs to." They began their search with the library. Bookshelves stretched floor to ceiling, and ladders on rails slid along their length like silent sentries. While Poirot checked the desk drawers and the cabinets behind hidden panels, Hastings busied himself flipping through dusty tomes. After nearly an hour, Poirot stood back and smoothed his jacket. "No, not here." "Where next?" Hastings asked. "Lady Amelia, are there any locked rooms or storage spaces in the house that you do not use?" She hesitated. "Well, yes, there is the attic. It has been sealed since my father died. Then we must see it." The attic door was located at the top of the main staircase, just above the step with the hollow sound. As Sikes fetched the ladder, Hastings leaned in close to Poirot. "Do you really think someone is up there?" "I think something is, mon ami. Whether it be a person or a secret, we shall soon see." With a groan, the ladder unfolded and was placed against the trapdoor. Poirot ascended first, his footsteps precise. Hastings followed, less gracefully. The attic was dim and stifling, thick with the scent of old wood and mothballs. Dust motes swirled in the shafts of light that pierced the boarded windows. Old trunks, covered furniture and painting frames leaned against the sloped walls. Poirot moved with purpose, tapping trunks and testing locks. Finally, he stopped before a heavy oak chest reinforced with brass. The lock matched the shape of the key. "Voilà," he said, inserting the key. It turned with a soft click. Inside were bundles of letters tied with ribbon, a pair of child's shoes, and an old journal bound in leather. Poirot lifted it carefully and opened the cover. "It belonged to Lady Amelia's father," he murmured. They took the journal downstairs to read in better light. The entries spanned decades, and the earlier pages were filled with the crisp, confident script of a man in his prime. As Poirot flipped through, the tone changed. The entries grew shorter. Then one line caught his eye. August 14th, 1913. "The voices have returned. Always on the stairs. She says it's nonsense, but I know what I heard. I should never have built it over the old servants' tunnel." Poirot tapped the page. "Hastings, look! An underground tunnel, perhaps forgotten. Built into the staircase, or beneath it." They showed the journal to Lady Amelia, who grew pale as she read. "My father was very secretive in his final years. I never knew half of what he did to this house." Poirot leaned forward. "May I speak to Sikes? He has been in this house the longest, yes." Lady Amelia nodded. The butler was summoned and entered with his usual quiet deference. "Monsieur Sikes," Poirot said gently, "were you aware of any servant tunnels beneath the house?" Sikes hesitated. Then, with a small nod, replied, "There is an old legend among the staff, sir, that during the plague the original owners of Charnwood had tunnels built beneath the manor, so the ill could be moved unseen. I have never seen them myself." Poirot stood. "Then I believe it is time to inspect the staircase more closely." They returned to the staircase with torches. Poirot tapped each step until he reached the hollow one again. He dropped to one knee and pressed along the baseboard. After a moment, a faint click echoed through the hall, and a narrow panel beneath the steps swung inward. Darkness yawned beyond it. Without hesitation, Poirot ducked and stepped inside. The air was stale and cool. The tunnel stretched downward at a sharp angle, carved of stone and braced with wooden beams. As they descended, the sound of the house faded, replaced by a thick silence broken only by the drip of unseen water. After 10 minutes they came to a small room, no larger than a pantry, lined with shelves. On the floor sat a wooden chair. Shackles hung from the wall beside it. Hastings drew in a sharp breath. Good heavens! Poirot ran a finger along one of the chains. These have not been used in many years, but they were used. On the far wall, scrawled in soot or perhaps charcoal, were words. She knows. She listens. She waits. Hastings turned to Poirot. "You think someone was kept here?" Poirot's voice was quiet. "Oui. Imprisoned. Forgotten." They returned to the light of the hall, each lost in their thoughts. Lady Amelia met them with worried eyes. "What did you find?" Poirot's gaze was unreadable. "The truth is beginning to reveal itself, madame. But we are not at the end. No, this is only the beginning." Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. The following day dawned overcast, and a persistent drizzle tapped at the windows like impatient fingers. The gloom suited the atmosphere at Charnwood House, which seemed to have grown heavier overnight. Though no further noises came from the staircase, an unspoken tension wound itself through the corridors like ivy. Poirot took his breakfast alone, his mind already occupied. Hastings, though more cheerful thanks to a generous helping of kippers and toast, still cast nervous glances towards the grand staircase. Neither had slept well after the discovery beneath it. Lady Amelia joined them shortly after, her expression taut. "You said someone may have been imprisoned there," she said, softly, not yet seated. "But who would have done such a thing?" "That is the question," Poirot replied, gesturing to the empty chair. "Please sit, madame. We must speak of your father." Lady Amelia hesitated. "What about him?" "He built over the tunnel. He had the key. He left behind words that hinted at fear. Voices, guilt, concealment. Was there anything unusual about his behaviour in his later years?" She frowned. "He became more private, certainly. He dismissed several long-standing staff members and closed off parts of the house. He wouldn't say why, but he never harmed anyone, Monsieur Poirot." "I do not accuse him," Poirot said gently. "But we must understand his mind. A man does not wall up history unless he fears what it might reveal." Hastings looked up. "Do you think he might have been protecting someone, or hiding something shameful?" "Both are possible," Poirot replied, "which is why we must learn more of Charnwood's past." By late morning, Poirot had secured a visit with the village historian, a retired schoolmaster named Mr. Edwin Trellis. The man lived in a small ivy-covered cottage half a mile from the house and received them warmly, though with some curiosity. "Charnwood House, you say?" he asked, adjusting his spectacles. Yes, I know it well. My own grandmother worked there as a scullery maid in her youth. What would you like to know?" Poirot smiled politely. "Anything you can tell us about unusual occurrences tied to the estate, particularly anything from around the turn of the century." Mr. Trellis tapped his fingers on his chin, then rose and fetched a heavy ledger from a bookshelf. "Let's see, here we are. In 1899, there was quite a stir about a missing girl. A housemaid named Eliza March disappeared one night, never seen again. Rumours flew. Some said she ran off with a stable boy. Others whispered she'd gone mad and drowned herself. But nothing was ever proven." Poirot leaned forward. "She worked at Charnwood?" "Oh, yes. In fact, she worked directly under Lady Amelia's grandmother, Margaret Trentham. The girl vanished shortly after Margaret gave birth to her only child." "Amelia's father," Hastings murmured. "Indeed," Trellis said. "Strange thing was, the family kept the matter very quiet, didn't even post a reward, and the police were never officially brought in." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Très intéressant. Isn't it just? There's always been talk, of course, that the poor girl knew something she shouldn't have. Or perhaps, well, you know how these old houses are. Secrets and scandals all buried under polished oak and inherited guilt." On their walk back to Charnwood, Hastings spoke first. "You think this missing maid, Eliza March, was the one in the tunnel?" "It is a theory," Poirot said, "and a chilling one. If she was not spirited away, or drowned but imprisoned, hidden, then we must ask by whom, and why." They returned to find Lady Amelia in the drawing-room, seated beside the fire with a letter in her lap. Her brow was furrowed in concern. "A message came while you were out," she said, From a solicitor in Brighton. It concerns the estate. Poirot took the letter and scanned it quickly. Then he read aloud. Dear Lady Amelia, it has come to our attention that the land grant of Charnwood House includes a rider clause dated 1872 regarding subterranean structures on the property. Under said clause, any undisclosed chamber or tunnel exceeding 10 metres in length must be reported to the Crown within 3 months of discovery. Failure to do so could result in forfeiture of said land or a reassessment of its title. Sincerely, Edward L. Parish, Parish and Bloom, Solicitor. Curious timing, Hastings said. More than curious, Poirot agreed. Who would know of our discovery, unless someone has been watching? Lady Amelia grew pale. Do you think someone is trying to drive me out? To force me to sell the house? Poirot said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned to Hastings. We must inspect the tunnel again. This time, with Lady Amelia's permission, we will go beyond the room. Lady Amelia nodded, though her fingers gripped the arm of the chair tightly. That afternoon, they returned to the staircase and opened the hidden panel. Poirot descended first, torch in hand. The tunnel stretched beyond the small room, sloping further downward before levelling into a narrow corridor. It was colder here, and the air smelled of stone and earth. As they moved further in, they discovered an iron grate, locked from the outside. Beyond it lay a crumbling wine cellar, long abandoned. Broken bottles lined the walls, and a pair of rusted candelabras had fallen onto the ground. Poirot examined the lock. Forced open once, then relocked. Someone didn't want visitors. Hastings spotted something glinting in the corner. He stooped and retrieved a silver locket on a broken chain. Inside was a miniature portrait of a young woman. Eliza? He asked. Poirot took it and nodded solemnly. It could be, and if so, it suggests she was here, trapped, forgotten. They returned to the house in silence, their discovery weighing heavily. That evening, as the house settled into a hush, Poirot made a quiet inspection of the guest wing. Near the end of the hall, he paused beside an ornate mirror. His reflection stared back at him, immaculate, composed. But behind it, he noticed something odd, a faint line along the wall. He stepped closer, tapped the glass. It echoed. Hollow, he whispered. He returned moments later with a candlestick and Hastings in tow. Together, they lifted the mirror, revealing a hidden recess in the wall. Inside lay a small compartment. A bundle of letters rested there, yellowed with age. Poirot unwrapped them carefully. The handwriting was different from the journal, but no less familiar. Each letter was signed, Eliza March. They were addressed to M.T. Margaret Trentham. Poirot said quietly. He read one aloud. My lady, I beg you, do not send me back into the tunnel. I have done as you asked. I did not speak a word to anyone, not even when he cried. I swear it. Please let me see the child again. Hastings looked stunned. She had a child. Or helped with one. Perhaps she was a midwife or a nursemaid. Either way, she was silenced. Poirot folded the letters carefully. The truth is coming, Hastings, and I fear it will be far darker than Lady Amelia ever imagined. Chapter 4. The Uninvited Guest. The rain returned overnight, lashing at the windows and turning the gardens of Charnwood House into a sea of mud. It was a morning not fit for man nor beast. and yet Hercule Poirot was already dressed, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his moustache immaculately waxed. He stood at the window of the breakfast-room, watching the drive, while Hastings attempted to butter toast with one eye half closed. "You're expecting someone?" Hastings asked, yawning. Poirot nodded slightly. "Indeed, mon ami. A figure has appeared on the chessboard, and I am most curious to see how he plays his hand." Before Hastings could inquire further, the faint hum of an approaching motor car reached their ears. It was an elegant black touring car, modern, expensive, and wholly out of place in the sleepy Sussex countryside. The vehicle came to a halt in the gravel drive. A man stepped out, tall, lean, and impeccably dressed in grey. He wore gloves despite the weather and carried a black umbrella. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if choreographed. Poirot met him at the front door. "Good morning," the man said, his voice clipped and precise. "My name is Julian Marlowe. I believe Lady Amelia is expecting me." "She is not," Poirot replied calmly. "But come in, monsieur. We dislike drama at the doorstep." The stranger stepped inside, pausing just long enough to cast a quick glance around the grand hall. His eyes lingered on the staircase. "I trust my visit is not inconvenient?" Poirot offered a slight smile. "That remains to be seen." Lady Amelia entered just then, still in her housecoat, startled by the intrusion. "Julian, what are you doing here?" Julian Marlowe removed his gloves. I received word that your solicitor had contacted you regarding the rider clause. I thought it prudent to ensure no missteps were made." Lady Amelia blinked. "You work for Parish and Bloom." "Not quite. I represent a private interest, with a long-standing concern in Charnwood's estate. You might say I'm a steward of certain legacies." "Uninvited," Poirot added, stepping between them slightly. Julian offered a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I assure you, my intentions are honourable. I only seek to advise Lady Amelia on how best to manage what she's uncovered. These old places, well, you know how troublesome secrets can be." Poirot studied him. "You speak as though you knew what we would find." Julian glanced at the staircase again. "One hears things." Lady Amelia straightened her shoulders. "If you came to frighten me out of my home, Julian, it won't work. My father never mentioned you, nor any other claim upon this house." "Your father kept many things from you," Julian said smoothly. "Including a debt," Poirot interjected. "A debt, monsieur?" Julian turned to him. "A favour owed, perhaps. A promise made long ago. I am simply here to collect what is due before this house becomes the centre of a very inconvenient scandal." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And what scandal would that be?" Julian smiled again. "Surely a great detective such as yourself has already guessed." Without waiting for dismissal, he turned and strolled to the sitting-room, as if he owned the place. Once he was out of earshot, Lady Amelia exhaled sharply. "I've never liked that man. He used to visit father when I was a girl, rarely spoke to me, always watching. And now here he is again, talking of debts and legacies. He is not merely a solicitor's envoy," Poirot said. "No, there is something more. He has knowledge, perhaps a lineage we have not uncovered." "He mentioned a scandal," Hastings said. "You think he means Eliza?" "Perhaps," Poirot murmured. "Or perhaps the child. Lady Amelia's face went pale. "You think my grandmother's child, my father, was not hers?" "It is a possibility," Poirot said gently. "And if true, it would explain many things. Eliza's disappearance, the secrecy, the tunnel." Lady Amelia shook her head, slowly, as if unwilling to let the idea settle. "Then who were we all these years? If not the true heirs, we must find out," Poirot said, "before Marlowe makes his move." That afternoon, Poirot asked to see the family records. They were stored in a locked cabinet in the library, and Lady Amelia produced the key with trembling fingers. Inside were ledgers, birth certificates, marriage licenses, most ordinary, but one item stood out. A sealed envelope, yellowed with age, marked, "To be opened upon my death," in Lord Percival Trentham's handwriting. Lady Amelia hesitated. "He left no instructions. But if it concerns all this—" Poirot took the envelope and opened it with care. Inside was a letter. "To my dearest Amelia, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and secrets must become truths. There is something I never told you. Your grandmother gave birth to a stillborn child. What followed was an act of desperation and grief. Eliza March, a maid in her service, had given birth weeks earlier to a healthy boy. The child was taken, my child, they claimed, and Eliza, well, she was not allowed to leave. She fought at first, begged, but Margaret was resolute. The child would bear our name. I did not agree, but I was weak. And when Eliza tried to escape with him, Margaret had her locked away. She died down there, Amelia. I do not know when. Her letters, her cries, I burned them all, except one. Guilt is a terrible weight. I kept it to remind myself of what we had done. Your father was not of our blood, Amelia, but he was raised with love. That must be enough now. Please, if you find the truth, do not let it destroy you. Forgive me, your loving father, Percival." Silence fell over the library like a shroud. Lady Amelia clutched the arm of a chair, her knuckles white. "So it is true," she whispered. "Everything you feared. Eliza's child was taken and raised as ours, which means—" Hastings began, then fell silent. Poirot finished the thought. That someone else, someone descended from Eliza, may have claim to this estate. They all looked toward the sitting-room, where Julian Marlowe sat by the fire, sipping brandy and watching the flames. Lady Amelia's voice was thin. "You think he is the child?" "Perhaps a grandson," Poirot said. "He is too young to be the boy himself. But he knows, or suspects." Hastings frowned. "Then why not simply prove his lineage? Why all this shadow play?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, "Because he lacks something vital, proof. Without it, he is nothing. So he threatens, he manipulates, and he waits for us to make a mistake." Lady Amelia drew herself up. "Then let's not give him one. What do we do now?" Poirot folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope. "Now, madame, we act swiftly. If there is one surviving letter from Eliza, as your father said, it may be hidden somewhere in this house, a final clue, a signature, a name, something Marlowe does not have." He turned to Hastings. "We must find that letter, before Marlowe finds us vulnerable, before the truth is taken and twisted to serve ambition, not justice." And somewhere, deep within the house, the hollow staircase creaked again. though no one had stepped upon it. Chapter 5. The letter in the clock by morning. Charnwood House had settled into a tense quiet. The rain had passed, but the air remained, heavy, the clouds reluctant to part. Poirot, ever meticulous, sat in the drawing-room polishing his cuff-links, though his mind was clearly elsewhere. Across from him, Hastings paced. "No one slept well," Hastings muttered, "not with Marlowe lurking in the house like a cat in a room full of birds." "He is biding his time," Poirot said softly, "waiting for us to lose our footing. That is why we must act while he is still uncertain." Lady Amelia entered, pale but composed. "I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, Eliza, trapped behind stone, waiting, and knowing that she died alone." She trailed off, blinking rapidly. "We must find her letter." Poirot stood. "Then let us begin. We will start in the places where secrets live, the quiet corners, the heirlooms, the things taken for granted." Their search began in earnest. Poirot examined paintings and portraits, tapping on walls and frames with a gloved knuckle. Hastings checked desk drawers, bookshelves, and sideboards. Lady Amelia joined them in the library, running, her hands over the spines of dusty books. But hours passed with no sign of the elusive final letter. It was Hastings who finally voiced what they all feared. What if Marlowe found it already? Poirot shook his head. No, he would not remain so coy if he had the proof in hand. It must be here still, waiting. He paused near the grandfather, clock in the corner of the library, an imposing oak structure with brass inlays and a long-forgotten elegance. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, and its steady tick filled the silence of the room. Poirot's gaze sharpened. "This clock," he said softly. "It belonged to Lady Margaret, did it not?" Lady Amelia looked up. Yes, it was hers, moved here from her private chambers after her death. Poirot stepped closer and gently opened the tall glass panel on its front. Inside, the brass pendulum swung with mechanical grace, hypnotic in its rhythm. Above it, 2 smaller compartments housed the weights. Then Poirot knelt. There, behind the base of the pendulum's wooden frame, a narrow slit had been carved into the wood, just wide enough for a piece of folded paper. He reached in with delicate fingers and retrieved a yellowed envelope, its seal long cracked but intact. "Eliza," he whispered. "She hid it here. Or perhaps someone hid it for her." He opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. The writing was shaky, frantic, but still legible. "To whoever finds this, I beg you, tell the truth. My name is Eliza March. They took my son from me. Lady Margaret claimed him as her own, and told me never to speak of it. When I tried to flee with him, they locked me away. I've scratched the days into the stone. I don't know how long I've been here. Please, if you find this, his name is Julian March. He was born December the 2nd, 1898. If he is still alive, he deserves to know. They cannot erase me. I was his mother. I am his mother." Hastings let out a low whistle. "Julian Marlowe! Good Lord!" "It is him," Poirot said grimly. "Or his son. He bears the name for a reason." Lady Amelia looked stricken. "Then he does have a claim, if he is Eliza's son." "Perhaps," Poirot said, "but timing is everything. If he does not possess this letter, he cannot prove it. And now we must decide what to do with it." Before anyone could answer, the library door creaked open. Julian Marlowe stood in the doorway, one hand still on the knob, the other in his coat pocket. "Ah," he said with a quiet smile. "I had wondered if you'd find it." Lady Amelia stepped forward. "You knew about the letter, I suspected. My grandmother, my real grandmother, told my father stories before she passed. Snatches of memories, the staircase, the room, the clock. I've been trying to piece it together for years." He stepped fully into the room, his smile vanishing. "I am Julian March, not Marlowe. That name came later. I came here to claim what is mine." "You came uninvited," Poirot said, stepping protectively between him and the letter. "I came for justice," Julian snapped. "For the mother who was buried alive in this house. For the life stolen from us." Hastings spoke quietly. "If you had simply asked—" "I did ask," Julian hissed. "Years ago, they dismissed me, called me a liar, said I was an opportunist. So I waited, I studied, I watched. And when I heard Lady Amelia had returned to the estate—" "You came to corner her," Poirot said, cutting him off. "To frighten her. You are not wronged only by history, monsieur. You are wronged by your own ambition." Julian's face hardened. "Are you going to give me the letter?" Poirot held it aloft. "This proves a truth, but it is a truth that must be weighed. You want revenge. That is not justice." "Then what do you suggest, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot turned to Lady Amelia, then back to Julian. "I suggest a reckoning, a proper one. This house has buried its secrets too long. Now we must bring them into the light. I will arrange a formal inquiry, with legal witnesses, with historians. Let the world hear the truth." Julian's lips tightened. "That takes time. I've waited long enough." Lady Amelia stepped forward, her voice surprisingly strong. "Then wait a little longer. If you want to honour Eliza's name, you'll do this the right way. Not by threats, not by shadows, but by truth spoken plainly and publicly." There was a silence as deep as stone. Finally, Julian's shoulders sagged. "Very well," he said, "but I will not be silenced again." Poirot nodded. "Nor should you be. Return tomorrow. We shall begin then." Julian left the room without another word. Lady Amelia sat down heavily on the settee. How did it come to this? "Because," Poirot said gently, "a lie, however old, will always find its way to the surface. And this house is built upon more than stone. It is built upon stories, some true, some false, and now they must be untangled." He folded the letter and placed it in a new envelope, sealing it with wax. Then he slipped it into his coat. "I will keep it safe. For now." Hastings glanced at the grandfather clock, its tick suddenly louder. "Odd, isn't it?" he said. "How time hides everything, and yet, in the end, reveals it all." Poirot gave a small smile. "Just so, mon ami." Just so. Chapter 6. A Face in the Glass. The morning air was sharp, biting at the windows of Charnwood House like 1,000 little knives. In the drawing-room the fire had been lit early, but it could not quite drive away the dampness that seemed to cling to every stone and every soul. Poirot sat alone at the writing desk, turning the sealed envelope over in his hands. Eliza's letter, proof of a buried truth, now held the fate of a legacy and the future of all those entangled within the house's long shadows. There was a knock at the door. "Enter!" Poirot called. It was Lady Amelia. She looked weary, as if the revelations of the past days had leached the colour from her bones. But her back was straight, her chin lifted. "I've spoken with my solicitor," she said, taking a seat opposite Poirot. "He believes Marlowe may have a case, if not for ownership, then at least for a portion of the estate. But if we make the first move, offer a formal acknowledgment of his lineage, he might settle quietly." Poirot steepled his fingers. "And do you wish that, madame? To offer him a share of your home?" Lady Amelia sighed. "I don't know what I want. I was raised believing in one truth. Now I find myself living inside another. I grieve for Eliza, for what was done to her, and for my father, who never knew who he truly was. But Marlowe, Julian, he is not a man who will be satisfied with quiet reconciliation." "No," Poirot said softly. "He has the air of one who has spent too long in the company of his own resentments." They were interrupted by Hastings, who entered with a frown and a folded paper in his hand. "This just arrived," he said, handing it to Poirot. "No sender. It was pushed under the front door." Poirot unfolded it carefully. The note was typed. "He doesn't want justice. He wants to bury the rest of the story. There's more beneath the stairs. You haven't found it yet. There was no signature." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Beneath the stairs," he murmured. Lady Amelia looked alarmed. "Do you think there's another tunnel?" "Perhaps not a tunnel," Poirot said, "but a chamber, a hiding place, somewhere Eliza or someone else hid what they could not say aloud." Hastings rubbed the back of his neck. "We searched that area already. The 8 stone steps, the cellar. There's nothing but dust and damp." Poirot stood. "Non, mon ami. There is always more. One must only look in the right way." He led them once more to the hollow staircase, the winding descent behind the fireplace. The flickering lanterns on the wall cast strange shadows as they descended, and the air grew thick with the scent of mildew and old secrets. Poirot halted on the second landing, his eyes fixed on the wall beside the steps. "There," he said, pointing. "Do you see the discoloration? Slight, very slight, but not part of the original stonework." He knelt and ran his fingers along. "The seam, a hidden panel," Hastings breathed. Poirot pressed lightly. There was a click. The panel slid inward to reveal a small, dark cavity. Inside sat a wooden box, carved with initials, E.M. He pulled it out gently and opened the lid. Inside were a collection of items: a small comb, a child's rattle, a faded photograph of a woman holding a baby in her arms, her eyes wary, her smile forced. There were also several folded pages. Poirot lifted the top one and read silently. "I write this in the dark. My baby is gone. They say he is dead, but I know the truth. She took him. Lady Margaret took him. She came in the night with the doctor and told me to be silent or I'd never see him again. She said the family name could not endure another scandal, that the child would have a better life with her. But I was his mother, and she was no saint. She lied. She had lied to everyone." Poirot stopped, his eyes flashing. "Lied?" Hastings asked. Poirot nodded. This is no longer merely about a stolen child. Lady Margaret herself, she was hiding something far more dangerous, something she was willing to imprison and destroy to protect. He reached into the box again and pulled out one final item, a silver pendant, its back engraved with the name Julian. Lady Amelia stared at it, then reached out with trembling fingers. "I've seen this before," she said, "years ago, in one of Father's drawers. I asked him about it. He said it was an heirloom from France. I never questioned it." Poirot's brow furrowed. "From France?" Lady Amelia nodded. He claimed it had been passed down from his mother's side. But if he was not her true son, Hastings began. "Then the story was invented," Poirot finished, "and the pendant, it is Eliza's, perhaps from her own mother, a token of the past." They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Hastings asked, "What do we do with all this?" Poirot looked toward the stairs. "We confront him with the truth, not merely of his birth, but of the pain and cruelty that shaped it. We show him what his grandmother endured, and we make him see that vengeance will not bring justice." They returned upstairs, the box carefully carried in Poirot's arms. Julian Marlowe was waiting in the drawing-room, standing by the window, with a glass of sherry. He turned as they entered, his gaze flicking to the box. "I see you found it," he said coolly. "Yes," Poirot replied, "and it tells more than you know, or perhaps more than you wish to believe." He set the box on the table and opened it. Julian approached, his eyes falling on the photograph. For a moment, his face cracked, just a flicker of raw emotion before it was hidden behind cold civility. "That's her," he said quietly. "My grandmother. My father never spoke of her. Not really. He said she died young, but I always wondered." Poirot picked up the letter, read it. Julian did. As he read, his jaw tightened, his hand trembled. When he reached the end, he said nothing. "Do you see now?" Poirot said softly. She was silenced, not by death alone, but by fear, and by those who feared truth more than scandal. Julian looked at Lady Amelia. "Your family did this." "No," she said, "their family did. I only inherited the house, not the sins." Julian nodded slowly. "So what now?" "We tell the full story," Poirot said. "We preserve her name, her memory, and yours." Julian's voice was hoarse. "And the estate?" Lady Amelia stepped forward. "You are part of this house, whether we like it or not. But let us not fight over stones and titles. Let us honour the woman who built her life in silence, and give her the voice she was denied." Julian looked at them both. For the first time there was no arrogance in his expression, only weariness. "I'll consider it," he said at last. Poirot nodded. "That is all we can ask." As Julian left the room, Poirot turned to the fire, gazing into its depths. "The truth, Hastings," he murmured. "It comes slowly, but always it comes." And somewhere, behind the ancient walls of Charnwood House, the hollow staircase creaked once more, no longer a secret, but a witness. Chapter 7. The Second Will. The day after Julian Marlowe's confrontation felt like a calm after, a storm. But Poirot was not fooled by calm. In old houses such as Charnwood, truth stirred slowly, like dust in shafts of light. The atmosphere remained tense, though no more threats had been made. A fragile truce, perhaps, but truce was not peace. Lady Amelia busied herself with legal documents, and Julian had returned to the village, promising to return in 2 days for the beginning of the formal inquiry. Yet Poirot, ever restless when mysteries remained incomplete, had one more thread to tug. It was during a quiet moment after lunch, when the house had momentarily settled into silence, that Poirot stood before the drawing-room fireplace and examined the ornate wooden panel above the mantel. Hastings, lounging nearby with a newspaper, glanced up. "You've stared at that carving for 5 minutes, Poirot. If it were going to confess, it would have done so by now." Poirot tapped the wood, lightly. "This motif, the family crest. You see the stag and the shield?" Hastings nodded. "Standard heraldry." "No, mon ami, not standard. There is a mark here." Poirot ran a finger along the left edge of the shield. "Do you see it? A small M, etched faintly. It was added later." Hastings squinted. "Could be for March, Eliza's surname." "Or perhaps," Poirot said, "for Margaret, Lady Margaret herself. This carving was redone in the early 1900s, according to the house records I perused yesterday evening." Hastings blinked. "You've been reading architectural surveys now?" "But of course," Poirot said smugly. "The smallest detail may reveal the largest secret." He pressed gently against the M. Click-dot, a narrow panel slid open behind the carving, revealing a shallow niche. Within lay a single parchment, yellowed but well preserved, bearing an ornate wax seal. Poirot extracted it carefully. "A will," he said, "and one written not by Lord Bertram, but by Lady Margaret." They gathered in the study, with Lady Amelia seated stiffly behind the desk, Poirot and Hastings flanking her. The fire crackled softly as Poirot broke the seal. "It is dated 1910, he said, 6 years before Eliza vanished." He began to read aloud, "To whom it may concern. In the event of my death, let it be known that I have made private provision for an heir not publicly acknowledged. The child Julian, born to Eliza March and adopted under my guardianship, shall receive a portion of the Charnwood estate, to be held in trust until his majority. This arrangement was made discreetly, to avoid scandal and to preserve the honour of my family. But the boy is of my blood in spirit, if not by name. Let no one deny him that." Poirot lowered the parchment slowly. Lady Amelia's hands trembled. She knew the truth, and yet still allowed Eliza to be locked away. She wanted to protect the name, Hastings said bitterly, even if it meant erasing someone's life. Poirot nodded grimly. She left behind this document, perhaps intending to use it if public pressure ever rose. But it was never filed legally, never entered into record. Lady Amelia stood and crossed to the window, staring out at the leafless trees that curled like claws over the grounds. And now this house, this family, must pay for a century of cowardice. "There is still a way forward," Poirot said gently. "With both letters, Eliza's and Margaret's, a full account of the truth can be made, not just whispered through walls, but acknowledged before the law." She turned. "And Julian?" Poirot shrugged. "That depends on whether he seeks a place in the family, or simply its wealth." Later that afternoon, The quiet was broken by the sudden arrival of the village solicitor, Mr. Albert Tilling, a stooped man with spectacles that magnified his eyes to comic proportions. He had been summoned by Poirot the day before. "I've brought the local property archives," he said breathlessly, "and the transfer records Lady Amelia asked for. But there's more, something strange." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Please, monsieur. Strange is what I do best." Tilling produced a battered leather folder. There was a change in ownership logged in 1899. Not of the estate itself, but of a parcel of land beneath the estate, technically classified as subterranean annex. Bought anonymously. Lady Amelia frowned. "That's absurd. How can someone own part of the foundation?" "It's a loophole," Tilling said. "Rare, but not impossible. Whoever filed it had deep knowledge of land law." Poirot took the folder, scanning the documents swiftly. Then he looked up, eyes sharp. It was Margaret. She wanted control over the cellars, the staircase, the hidden chamber. She bought the very earth under the house, to make sure no one else could claim it. "But why?" Hastings asked. "She already owned the house." "Because she feared exposure," Poirot said. "If the estate ever passed to another heir, they might renovate, dig, discover Eliza's prison. But if Margaret owned the ground beneath, no one could touch it without her legal permission." Lady Amelia's voice was cold. "So she bought silence, in every form." Poirot gave a single solemn nod. With the arrival of dusk, the mood in the house grew heavy once more. The lamps were lit, and a hush fell over the corridors. Poirot stood in the library, gazing out into the darkness. He heard soft footsteps behind him. It was Julian. "I heard you found something new," he said without preamble. Poirot turned. "We found a second will, written by Lady Margaret, acknowledging you. It is not official yet, but it reveals her intent. That may carry weight in court." Julian stared at him. She knew, and still she let my grandmother rot in that chamber." Poirot offered the letter. Julian took it slowly, reading the short declaration. When he finished, he let out a short, bitter laugh. "She calls me of her blood in spirit." What gall! She couldn't even admit the truth. "No," Poirot said, "but she left the door ajar. Perhaps in her own way she tried to atone." Julian looked up, his voice tight. "Would you have forgiven her?" "I am not the one she wronged," Poirot replied, "but I have seen what vengeance makes of men. And I tell you now, monsieur, truth brings peace. Vengeance brings only shadows." Julian held the paper for a long time, then folded it carefully and placed it on the table. "I'll speak at the inquiry, not just about what was taken, but about what could be rebuilt." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "My father never knew where he came from, but he loved this house. Maybe I could too. Some day, Poirot watched him go." Then he turned back to the window. "Perhaps," he murmured, "perhaps." Chapter 8. Echoes in the Gallery. The long gallery of Charnwood House was a place of ancestral pride. Portraits stared down from its panelled walls. Generations of Bertrams and Marches with solemn eyes, powdered wigs, stiff collars, and lips sealed in disapproval or quiet defiance. The wind tapped gently at the high arched windows that overlooked the winter-browned gardens, as if trying to remind the house that the outside world still existed. Poirot walked the length of the gallery slowly, his polished shoes tapping on the wooden floor. His gaze swept from portrait to portrait, pausing briefly before one, a stern-looking woman in dark green, her expression pinched with restrained authority. "Lady Margaret," he murmured. She stared back at him from the canvas, her eyes cold and proud. It was hard to reconcile the elegant figure in paint with the woman who had hidden a child, imprisoned a servant, and manipulated the legal boundaries of her own estate to ensure silence. Yet, as with many things at Charnwood, both appearances and intentions had layers. Hastings entered a moment later, his usual brisk energy subdued by the solemnity of the space. "Julian's gone back to the village," he said quietly. "He wants time to prepare for the inquiry." Poirot nodded. "Wise. He will need more than sentiment to prove his place here." Hastings's eyes roved across the portraits. "It's strange, standing here. So many faces, so many lives, and yet only now is the truth really being told." "Yes," Poirot said, "and still I feel we are missing something." Hastings raised a brow. Again, Poirot turned toward the far end of the gallery, where a final portrait stood apart from the others. Smaller, darker in tone. It depicted a man with piercing blue eyes and auburn hair, seated in a leather chair with a book resting in one hand. His expression was unreadable. Poirot stepped closer. "Bertram March," he said, "but younger than in the other portraits. This one was painted when he inherited the estate." There was a plaque beneath the frame. "Bertram March, 1895. Poirot traced the frame's edge, then abruptly tilted the painting forward. Behind it, inset into the wall, was a small iron grate. Hastings leaned in. "A vent? Not quite," Poirot said. "This house has many hidden chambers. This grate does not ventilate. It listens." He reached for a thin metal rod from a nearby lamp and used it to lever the grate open. A narrow shaft stretched back, leading into darkness. Poirot lit a candle and held it near the opening. A cool draught issued forth, and with it something else. Faint but distinct, the scent of tobacco. "This passage," Poirot said softly, "connects to the library below." Hastings frowned. "You think someone's been listening in?" Poirot nodded. "Not just recently. I believe this was Lady Margaret's private route. She was not content with sealing away the truth. She wanted to monitor it." He rose and replaced the grate. There may be records somewhere. Journals, notes. She must have kept something. They returned to the library, where Poirot's gaze immediately fell upon the massive oak desk beneath the stained glass window. He opened the top drawer and began working methodically. 10 minutes later, beneath a false bottom, he found it, a black leather journal, marked with the initials M.B. He opened it to the first page. "The child has blue eyes. Like her, I have told the doctor what must be done. Bertram remains unaware. It is for the best." Poirot flipped forward. She has grown silent. The girl, Eliza. I cannot say whether she understands what we did, or whether she is simply lost. I find her presence unsettling, but the child must be raised properly. I will ensure his path is worthy. Hastings leaned over his shoulder, reading with a growing sense of horror. She really thought she was protecting them. Poirot nodded grimly. Such are the dangers of pride masquerading as duty. A later entry caught his attention. The boy grows restless. He asks questions. He dreams of faces he's never seen. I told him they were fantasies. I burned the locket when he found it. Poirot looked up sharply. The pendant Julian now carries. He must have recovered it before it was destroyed. What do we do with this? Hastings asked. It's damning. Yes, Poirot said, but it is also a confession. And perhaps, in her own cold, twisted way, Lady Margaret meant it to be found. As they stood in the library, Lady Amelia entered. She looked tired but composed, her fingers lightly stained with ink, evidence of a long afternoon spent writing letters. "We're making arrangements," she said. "The family trust will be adjusted. Julian will be given a seat on the board, and I've contacted the press." Poirot arched a brow. "The press, madam?" "If this is to be undone, it must be public," she said firmly. "Let no future Bertram forget Eliza. Let no heir pretend they come from an unbroken line of honour." Poirot smiled faintly. "You are braver than your ancestors, I think." She met his gaze. "I have less to lose and more to atone for." Poirot handed her the journal. She took it with a steady hand, flipping briefly through the pages before closing it. "She never told me," Amelia said. "Not once. I always thought her a creature of control, of etiquette. But this was something darker." "Secrets rarely stay buried, madame," Poirot said, "especially in houses with walls as thin as these." Later that night, Poirot and Hastings stood on the back terrace, the sky above them littered with stars. The air was crisp and clear, and for the first time in days, the house behind them was still. "I must say, Poirot," Hastings said, "I didn't expect this case to end the way it has. There's been no arrest, no murderer, and yet justice, mon ami," Poirot said, "has many forms. Sometimes it is the truth itself that must be unearthed, not a body." "You think Julian will stay?" Hastings asked. Poirot considered it. "He has every reason to leave, but perhaps he will stay, not for revenge, but for redemption. And Amelia, she has done what few would. She has chosen truth over legacy. That is a rare courage." They stood in silence for a while, the stars watching. Then Hastings said, "Do you think Eliza would have been proud of what's come of this?" Poirot smiled gently. "I think, wherever she is, she knows that her voice was heard at last. And that is no small thing." Chapter 9. The Final Decision. The day of the inquiry arrived under a sky that was both bright and forbidding. A thin veil of clouds hung over Charnwood House, casting the grand estate in an eerie light. A sense of anticipation filled the air as the participants in the inquiry, attorneys, local magistrates and witnesses, gathered in the formal sitting room. The room was opulent in its decor, but today it felt strangely hollow, as if it too was holding its breath in the face of, the long-suppressed truth. Poirot arrived early, as he always did before such moments, to observe the scene before it unfolded. His sharp eyes took in every detail of the room. the gleaming mahogany table, the polished chairs, and the people who filled the space with their uneasy murmurs. Hastings was at his side, as ever, his face tense with the weight of the proceedings. Ahead. Is it always like this, Poirot? Hastings asked quietly. The tension, I mean. Poirot's gaze swept over the gathering. Always, mon ami. But that is the nature of truth. It is a quiet thing, but it shakes the world when it is finally spoken aloud. Lady Amelia was seated at one end of the table, her expression composed, but her hands betraying her nervousness as they folded and unfolded on the surface. Beside her sat Julian Marlowe, who looked far less assured than he had the day before, his posture stiff and his eyes darting from person to person. The Bertram family solicitor, Mr. Tilling, stood near the door, looking as though he wished to shrink into the shadows. Poirot watched them for a moment before turning to Hastings. This will be difficult for them, for both Julian and Lady Amelia, but the past has already claimed them. What happens today will determine their future. Hastings nodded, but his gaze was wary. You think Julian will accept what's coming? I think he has little choice, Poirot said. The truth is now his companion, whether he likes it or not. The room slowly quieted as the local magistrate entered, his sombre expression reflecting the seriousness of the moment. He was followed by several other individuals, including a representative from the legal council and an archivist who had been summoned to present documents. The formalities of the inquiry began, but Poirot was already focused on the most crucial part, the presentation of the evidence. Lady Amelia stood first, her voice steady as she addressed the gathering. I have called this inquiry to bring to light the full history of the Bertram family, she said, her words clear but with an underlying tension. I wish to acknowledge my half-brother Julian Marlowe as part of this family. His heritage, long concealed, is no longer to be hidden. In the shadows, Julian shifted in his seat, but he did not speak. His eyes were on the table, but his fingers clenched at the edge of it, betraying the turmoil within him. Poirot leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes catching every movement, every expression in the room. He had seen many people, rich and poor, noble and common, stand before such a tribunal, but there was something different here, a weight of guilt and redemption, of lost time and unspoken forgiveness hung in the air. The solicitor, Mr. Tilling, presented the will that had been uncovered by Poirot, the one written by Lady Margaret years ago, quietly acknowledging Julian's existence as an heir. He placed it carefully on the table for all to see, and the room grew still as the words were read aloud. To whom it may concern, in the event of my death, let it be known that I have made private provision for an heir not publicly acknowledged. The child Julian, born to Eliza March and adopted under my guardianship, shall receive a portion of the Charnwood estate, to be held in trust until his majority. This arrangement was made discreetly, to avoid scandal and to preserve the honour of my family. But the boy is of my blood in spirit, if not by name. Let no one deny him that. There was a long pause, the gravity of the document sinking in. Julian's gaze flickered from the will to Lady Amelia, but he did not speak. Poirot, who had been watching intently, turned to the magistrate. This document, I believe, provides the necessary legal foundation to establish Julian's right to the estate. But there is more. The room turned its attention to Poirot as he stood. What is more important, he continued, is not the distribution of wealth or the transfer of property. It is the recognition of a family that has been broken, and the legacy of a woman, Eliza March, who, despite being forced into silence, sought to leave behind the truth. Poirot's voice softened, and he looked at Lady Amelia. It is to her memory and to the future of this house that we must now look. The past cannot be changed, but the future can be shaped with honesty. Lady Amelia's eyes welled with unshed tears, but she did not look away from Poirot. I have spent my life keeping secrets, she said quietly. But today I choose to unbury them, not just for Julian, but for Eliza. For everything she endured, she turned to Julian, her voice firm but kind. You are my brother, Julian, not just by blood, but in every sense of the word. You have every right to this house, and I will ensure you have it. Julian blinked, and for the first time in days there was a flicker of emotion on his face. Something raw, something vulnerable. He opened his mouth, but words failed him. He simply nodded, a small but significant gesture. The solicitor cleared his throat. There remains one last matter to address, the ownership of Charnwood House and its estate. He looked at Lady Amelia. As the primary heir and sole remaining member of the Bertram family, you must formally relinquish control, as per the terms of your father's will. Lady Amelia inhaled sharply, but she did not hesitate. I have already signed the necessary documents. Julian will take the position as head of the estate, with my full support. My only condition is that this house remains open to the memory of Eliza. Mr. Tilling nodded, and the proceedings continued. After a series of formal questions and exchanges, the inquiry was officially concluded. The documents were signed, and the legal weight of the past was finally lifted. As the room began to empty, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. It's over, then? Poirot nodded. For now, yes, but the work of healing will continue, for both Julian and Lady Amelia. They found themselves in the hallway afterward, the air still heavy with the after-effects of the day's events. You know, Poirot, Hastings said, I never thought I'd see the day when a family would voluntarily give up a title like this. Lady Amelia was willing to do what many would have fought against with every ounce of their being. Poirot smiled. She chose the right path. There is a nobility in that, a nobility that transcends titles and wealth. As they stood by the door, ready to leave, Julian appeared. He was alone now, his face calm but distant. I want to thank you, Julian said, looking at Poirot with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. You gave me the truth, but I still don't know what to do with it. Poirot's expression softened. You will find your way, monsieur. The truth will guide you, and in the end it will give you peace. Julian nodded slowly. Perhaps. He turned to Lady Amelia, who had just joined them. Thank you for everything. She reached out and took his hand. You are part of this family. Always have been. The moment stretched between them, unspoken words passing through the silence, and for the first time The tension in the air seemed to lift. Poirot, his work now complete, gave them one last look before turning to leave. Outside the evening was calm, the winter sky now a deep shade of indigo. The truth had been spoken. The family had been reunited, and Charnwood House, once a place of secrets, would now carry the weight of a new legacy, one built on honesty, acceptance, and the courage to face the past. Chapter 10. A New Dawn for Charnwood House. The morning after the inquiry was over, Charnwood House stood in peaceful stillness. The storm of emotions and legalities that had swept through its halls had passed, leaving behind a quiet calm, as though the house itself had taken a deep breath and was now waiting for what would come next. Poirot stood by the large bay window in the sitting-room, looking out across the grounds. The sun was rising slowly over the distant hills, casting a golden light across the frost-covered lawns. The morning was crisp and clear, and in the distance he could hear the faint caw of a raven perched atop one of the ancient trees that lined the property. Hastings joined him, taking a seat in one of the velvet armchairs by the fire, which still burned softly. He watched Poirot for a moment before speaking. "Do you think they'll be all right, Poirot? Lady Amelia and Julian?" Poirot smiled faintly, his gaze never leaving the window. "I believe they will be. They have both made difficult choices, but they have chosen to face the future with courage. That is all anyone can do." Hastings nodded slowly, his brow furrowing as he reflected on the events of the previous days. "It's strange, isn't it? How the truth has a way of changing everything. I mean, who would have thought that Charnwood House, with all its wealth and history, would be saved by such an old secret?" Poirot turned to face his friend. "Ah, Hastings, that is the essence of every mystery, is it not? A small truth, hidden away, that changes the course of everything. And yet, it is never the wealth or the titles that matter. It is the people, what they do, how they choose to live in the face of their past, that defines them." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "And what about Eliza? What do you think she would make of all this?" Poirot's expression softened, a distant look in his eyes as he thought for a moment. "Eliza was a woman of great strength. She did what she had to do, not out of malice, but out of love. Her life was one of sacrifice and quiet defiance, and in the end she has been remembered. Think, were she alive today, she would be content with how things have turned out." There was a long silence between them before Hastings spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Poirot, I've been thinking. Do you believe the case is truly closed?" Poirot's eyes sparkled with a mixture of amusement and insight. "Ah, my friend, you are not so simple. You are right to ask. No, the case is never truly closed. There are always ripples in the water. But I believe the major questions have been answered, and the truth has come to light. Now it is up to Julian and Lady Amelia to decide what comes next." Hastings leaned back in his chair, considering Poirot's words. It's strange to think that after all the twists and turns, after the hidden rooms, the secret passages, and the long-forgotten will, it all came down to a single decision: Julian and Amelia's future. Everything else seemed like mere window dressing. Poirot nodded slowly. "Precisely. That, Hastings, is the heart of the matter. It is not the mystery of the staircase, or the portraits, or the will that ultimately matters. It is the people who live within these walls, and how they choose to shape their lives after the truth is revealed. At that moment, the door to the sitting room opened, and Lady Amelia entered. Her face was more relaxed now, but there was still a trace of exhaustion in her eyes. She had aged in the last few days, her shoulders heavier with the burden of leadership, yet there was a quiet strength about her that had not been there before. "Poirot, Hastings," she greeted them with a slight smile, her voice warm but weary. "I wanted to thank you both again. You've done something here that I never thought possible. You've given me back my family." Poirot rose from his position by the window, giving her a small but genuine smile. "It was my pleasure, madame. But the credit belongs to you and your brother. You both made the choice to face the truth and build a future upon it." Lady Amelia nodded, her gaze flicking briefly to the portrait of Lady Margaret that hung above the fireplace. "I've spent so many years trying to ignore the past, burying it away like something that could simply be forgotten. But I've come to realize that the past never really goes away. It stays with you, waiting for the moment when you're strong enough to confront it. And now you have," Poirot said softly. She met his gaze. "Yes, and in doing so, I've discovered something. Else, I'm not just the heir to Charnwood House. I'm a woman with a legacy of my own, one that doesn't rely on old secrets or hidden truths. I want to build a new legacy, one that honors the past, but looks forward to the future." Julian appeared in the doorway just then, his expression more composed than it had been the previous day. His eyes met Poirot's for a moment, and then he looked at Lady Amelia. There was a quiet understanding between them, a bond that had been forged in the fire of the past week. "I've been thinking," Julian began, his voice steady but uncertain, "about what comes next, about how I fit into this family. I never asked for any of this, but I know now that I can't just turn my back on it either." Lady Amelia smiled, her eyes warm. "You don't have to, Julian. We're family, whatever that means." Julian nodded, though his face remained guarded. He glanced toward Poirot, who gave him an encouraging look. "You will find your place here, monsieur," Poirot said quietly. "The future is not something to fear. It is something to embrace." Julian gave a small, rueful smile. "I hope so, Poirot. I hope so." There was a long pause before Lady Amelia spoke again. "I've made a decision. Julian, I want you to take your rightful place as the head of Charnwood House. I've already arranged for the legal changes to be made. You'll have the authority to lead the estate from this day forward." Julian blinked, clearly taken aback. "But what about you?" "I'm still here," she said gently. "I will help, of course. I will always be here for you, for both of us. But it's time for a new chapter." The weight of her words hung in the air for a moment, before Julian finally nodded, his eyes steady. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Amelia replied with a soft laugh. "Just take the first step." Poirot, sensing that his work was nearly done, stood quietly by the window once more. He had no further words of advice to offer, for he had already said what needed to be said. The family was no longer broken. The truth, though difficult, had brought them closer together. There would be challenges ahead, of course, but they had been given a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to grow. As Poirot stepped toward the door, he paused for a moment and looked back at the two siblings standing in the centre of the room. They were no longer strangers to each other, no longer separated by the wall of secrets. They were family, and that, Poirot knew, was the most important thing of all. He smiled faintly to himself as he left Charnwood House behind, stepping out into the crisp morning air. There would be other cases, other mysteries to solve, but for now he felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The hollow staircase was no longer a secret, and neither was the future.